No one tells you this, but most lives don't fall apart loudly. They don't explode in scandal or collapse in one dramatic failure. They decay quietly, slowly, through 1,000 small moments where you knew what needed to be done and chose not to move. Not because you were incapable, not because you were lazy, but because hesitation felt safer than action. You wake up tired, even after sleeping. Not because your body is exhausted, but because your spirit is. You scroll, plan, save videos, read threads, take notes. You call it preparing. You call it learning. Deep down, you know the truth. You're stalling. You're postponing the moment where you have to prove something to yourself. This is what modern burnout actually is. It isn't working too hard. It's living too long in contradiction. It's the quiet tension of carrying knowledge without execution, of seeing clearly what kind of man you could be, while repeatedly choosing comfort over movement. Burnout is not exhaustion. Burnout is self-betrayal. They taught you to think motivation was a problem, that you needed more inspiration, better routines, the perfect plan. But motivation has never saved anyone. Motivation comes and goes like weather. The men who endure are not fueled by emotion. They are governed by decision. The modern man delays because delay feels harmless. There's no immediate punishment for waiting. No visible wound when you hesitate. But every pause leaves a mark. Every time you say later, something inside you weakens. Trust erodes. Respect diminishes. And over time, you start to see yourself as someone who doesn't act. Someone who knows but doesn't move. This is how the collapse happens. Not through chaos, but through comfort. Not through failure, but through endless almosts. You almost trained, almost started, almost spoke up, almost became dangerous. And almost is the most expensive word a man can afford. You were never lazy. Laziness is a moral insult used to shame men who are overstimulated, overfed with information, and underdisciplined in action. Your nervous system is fried. Your attention is fragmented. Your will is drowned in dopamine spikes that promise relief without effort. Of course it feels hard to begin. But difficulty does not mean dysfunction. Resistance is not proof of weakness. It is proof that something meaningful is on the other side. The real enemy has always been hesitation. That half second where the mind begins to negotiate, where it offers excuses dressed as logic, where it asks for certainty in a world that only rewards movement. Hesitation is where potential goes to die. The world tells you to wait until you feel ready, until conditions are perfect, until confidence arrives. But readiness is not a feeling. It is a byproduct. Action creates clarity. Movement creates confidence. Stillness creates doubt. You don't lack motivation. You lack decisiveness. You don't need more information. You need fewer pauses between knowing and doing. Every disciplined man learns this lesson eventually. The cost of hesitation is always higher than the cost of action. Action might be uncomfortable, but hesitation corrodes the soul. One builds strength. The other builds regret. And if hesitation is slowly killing your life, your focus, your sense of self, then the question is no longer why you feel this way. The question becomes this: how did the deadliest warrior in history train himself to move without delay? Miyamoto Musashi is often reduced to a myth, a poetic image of a lone swordsman wandering mist-covered roads. But the truth is far less romantic and far more confronting, because Musashi was not a philosopher who happened to fight. He was a man who lived face-to-face with death and refused to blink. He fought over 60 real duels, not tournaments, not practice bouts, but encounters where hesitation meant dying in the date, and he never lost, not because he was stronger than everyone else, but because he moved before doubt had time to form. Musashi did not train for aesthetics or honor as modern men imagine it. He trained for outcome, and outcome demanded timing, decisiveness, and a mind emptied of unnecessary thought. Where modern life gives you infinite options, Musashi lived in a world of singular moments, and in those moments there was no room for internal debate, no luxury of asking how he felt, only the demand to act correctly and immediately. He understood that the sword is not defeated by strength alone but by delay, and that most men are not beaten by opponents but by the pause between intention and movement. This is why Musashi trained relentlessly against mental hesitation rather than external enemies, because he knew the real battlefield was inside, where fear disguises itself as strategy and caution pretends to be wisdom. His philosophy was grounded in Mushin, the state of no mind, not emptiness in the modern sense, but freedom from the noise that paralyzes action, a mind so still that action arises without friction. Stillness for Musashi did not mean passivity, it meant clarity, and from clarity came immediate, precise movement, the kind that ends conflict before it escalates. Modern men drown in options, notifications, and opinions, constantly simulating life instead of living it, rehearsing outcomes instead of committing to them, and this endless simulation breeds paralysis, because when everything is possible, nothing is chosen. Musashi lived the opposite reality, where each moment demanded a single response, and the man who survived was the man who answered without delay. Timing, to Musashi, was not a tactic but a way of being, an awareness so sharp that the correct action revealed itself instantly, without emotional interference. He did not wait for confidence, because confidence was a byproduct of movement, not a prerequisite. And he did not seek certainty, because certainty is a fantasy reserved for those who never step into danger. What made Musashi lethal was not aggression but commitment, the refusal to retreat into thought once action was required. Where modern men are taught to analyze endlessly, Musashi learned to see once and move once, and in that simplicity there was dominance. His stillness was not hesitation, it was readiness, and when the moment arrived, the response was immediate and final. Musashi understood something that modern culture has forgotten entirely, that hesitation is not intelligence, it is weakness disguised as caution, and that in any meaningful pursuit, the man who moves decisively gains an advantage that no amount of preparation can replace. He lived in a world where delay had consequences, and because of that, he forged a mind that cut through doubt the same way his blade cut through opponents. Musashi understood something we've forgotten. Hesitation is a luxury only the weak can afford. The 3-minute rule is not a productivity trick, not a habit hack, and not a motivational slogan. It is a disciplined blade designed to cut hesitation before it hardens into identity, and its power lies in its simplicity. When something that matters appears in front of you, you begin within 3 minutes, no negotiation, no optimization, no emotional permission required. Musashi never waited to feel aligned or inspired because waiting was a death sentence, and while modern life rarely threatens your body, it constantly erodes your character through delay, teaching you to hesitate, to second-guess, to postpone action until confidence magically appears. The rule exists to interrupt that decay, because procrastination is not caused by laziness but by an overactive mind that believes it must fully understand, plan, and emotionally agree before moving. Neurologically, the longer you wait, the more the brain activates threat assessment, uncertainty loops, and avoidance behavior, turning a simple task into a psychological weight. But when you act quickly, before thought stacks on thought, you bypass the resistance system entirely. This is why the rule demands movement within 3 minutes, not perfection, not completion, just the first physical action, because movement collapses mental friction. Ancient discipline understood this long before neuroscience could explain it, through principles like Gwaji, practice without gaps, the refusal to allow space between intention and execution, because gaps are where fear breeds. Kaizen is often misunderstood as slow improvement, but its deeper truth is momentum over magnitude, the idea that consistency of action matters more than the size of effort, and the 3-minute rule creates that momentum by making action automatic rather than emotional. Zen teaches that movement dissolves resistance, not the other way around, and Musashi embodied this by acting from stillness rather than thought, allowing action to arise cleanly without internal debate. When you obey the rule repeatedly, something profound happens beneath the surface. You begin to see yourself differently. Each time you act without hesitation, you deposit trust into your relationship with yourself, and self-respect is built the same way muscles are built, through repeated, often unglamorous effort. The man who moves within 3 minutes becomes a man who acts, not because he feels powerful, but because he proves it daily through obedience to action. This is why the rule destroys procrastination at the identity level. Because procrastination is not a time issue, it is a self-trust issue, and every delayed action reinforces a belief that you cannot rely on yourself. The old mindset says, "I'll do it later properly," hiding fear behind perfectionism, while the new mindset says, "I move now imperfectly," understanding that clarity is earned through action, not contemplation. The rule does not ask you to finish, only to begin, because beginnings shape outcomes, and the man who begins consistently wins by default in a world addicted to delay. Over time, the internal debate weakens, because the mind learns it no longer controls the body, and this reversal of authority is where discipline is born. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what must be done, and in that shift, weakness loses its grip. But knowing the rule is not enough, because the mind will resist it, argue with it, and attempt to sabotage at the moment it threatens comfort. Your brain was never designed to make you fulfilled, disciplined, or powerful. It was designed to keep you alive, and survival has very little interest in your potential. This is a conflict most men never understand, because they assume resistance means something is wrong with them, when in reality resistance is proof that the brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do: seek comfort, avoid uncertainty, and conserve energy. The brain is a survival machine, not a success machine, and growth has always been a threat to survival because growth requires risk, discomfort, and exposure to the unknown. When you feel that invisible wall before action, that heaviness in the chest, that sudden flood of excuses, it is not laziness surfacing. It is your nervous system attempting to pull you back into familiar, because familiarity feels safe even when it is slowly killing you. Comfort does not feel dangerous in the moment, but comfort is death by stagnation, a slow erosion of capability that happens so quietly you mistake it for peace. Overthinking is not intelligence. It is fear dressed in language, a defensive strategy that delays action long enough for the threat to pass. And in modern life, the threat is not a predator but a possibility of failure, exposure, or effort. Dopamine has replaced danger as a brain's primary regulator, training you to seek quick relief instead of long-term strength, making stillness uncomfortable and effort feel foreign. This is why starting feels harder than continuing, because the brain panics at initiation, not endurance, and once movement begins, resistance weakens. The mistake is believing the voice of hesitation is you, when it is merely an instrument responding to outdated rules. Your mind is not you, it is a tool, and like any tool, it must be trained, directed, and sometimes ignored. Samurai understood this deeply, not through theory but through survival, acknowledging fear without obeying it, feeling hesitation without negotiating with it, and placing discipline above emotion because emotion was unreliable under pressure. Fear was allowed to exist, but it was never allowed to decide. Modern men invert this hierarchy, letting emotion command action and wondering why consistency never arrives. The identity shift begins the moment you stop interpreting resistance as a flaw and start seeing it as a signal, a sign that you are standing at the threshold of growth. When resistance appears, it means you are about to step beyond the familiar self, and the familiar self will always fight to remain in control. This is why the thought something is wrong with me must die, because it keeps you trapped in self-analysis instead of self-command. The truth is simpler and harsher. Nothing is wrong with you. You are just standing where strength is required. The disciplined man does not wait for resistance to disappear, because it never will. He learns to move with it present, understanding that courage is not the absence of fear but the refusal to obey it. Once this is understood, hesitation loses its moral weight, and action becomes mechanical rather than emotional. You stop asking why it feels hard and start accepting that it will feel hard, and that hardness is the price of transformation. When resistance becomes a marker instead of an obstacle, you stop fighting yourself and start using the discomfort as confirmation that you are walking the correct path. And once this awareness is installed, the question naturally shifts away from why you struggle to act towards something far more dangerous and practical. How do you install the 3-minute rule into a life built on delay? The 3-minute rule does not remain theoretical. It must live in your body, in the rhythm of your day, embedded into the smallest actions that define your life. And this begins the moment you decide that movement is non-negotiable, that hesitation will no longer dictate your identity. It starts at dawn, when the alarm sounds, and you refuse the seductive comfort of the snooze button, rising within 3 minutes to face the day, knowing that discipline is not earned in hours but in the unyielding obedience to tiny, repeated decisions, and by doing so, you declare to yourself that your intentions carry weight in the real world. Training follows the same rule. The warm-up begins the instant thought enters your mind, before planning, before stretching into excuses, because the body learned commitment before it understands motivation, and movement begets momentum. Work becomes a battlefield of attention. The moment a task is visible, you open the document, write the first line, take the first step, no matter how imperfect, because execution builds clarity, and clarity transforms thought into direction. Difficult conversations, the ones your mind avoids with subtle cunning, are attacked in the same way. You pick up the phone, send a message, speak the truth, because courage is grown in action, not rehearsal. And the moment you act decisively, the self-doubt that has ruled you begins to shrink. Every personal discipline task, washing, organizing, preparing, learning, is approached under the same law. Notice, act within 3 minutes, and commit to the first physical action. Do not negotiate. Do not wait for mood. Do not argue with discomfort. In this way, life becomes a series of swords drawn, moments where half-steps are forbidden, and every action confirms your commitment to yourself. Indecision becomes unnatural, hesitation impossible. This is the heart of the samurai analogy. The sword is ready, the mind is ready, the body is ready, and when the moment comes, all that remains is movement, precise and final, and in your life, every small choice becomes a drawn blade, every action a declaration. Masculinity, in this sense, is not posture or aggression. It is a quiet insistence of presence, the clarity born from doing rather than thinking, the respect that follows a man who moves when others hesitate. Systems replace motivation, because motivation is fleeting and unreliable, but systems are relentless and automatic, and the 3-minute rule transforms every moment into an opportunity to build momentum and identity simultaneously. Over time, as you obey the rule without exception, something dangerous begins to emerge within you, a refusal to remain passive, an internal authority that overrides comfort, a rhythm of action that trains your body, mind, and spirit to trust themselves, to move first, and to create clarity where others only find confusion. Life, in every domain, starts to obey this new rule, because you have trained yourself to act decisively before hesitation can whisper, and the small victories compound into a man who does not wait for conditions to align, a man who opens a document, lifts the sword, speaks the hard truth, begins a workade, and moves imperceptibly but relentlessly toward the person he promised himself he could be. This is not about speed or perfection. It is about the unbroken commitment to initiation, because the first movement shapes all that follows, and when this discipline is installed, the chaos of modern distraction loses its power, the paralysis of overthinking collapses, and the man who moves consistently begins to inhabit a space that others cannot reach, a quiet dominion of self-respect, clarity, and unstoppable forward motion. And do this long enough, and something dangerous happens. Something permanent. The man who hesitated now ceases to exist, replaced by the man who acts without question. The man who obeys a 3-minute rule long enough does not merely complete tasks. He becomes a different creature altogether, a man whose identity is forged in the crucible of repeated action, where hesitation once lived. Anxiety begins to shrink because trust replaces uncertainty, trust in himself, in his timing, in the fact that movement precedes clarity, and clarity follows. Inevitability. Each completed action deposits proof into the bank of self-respect. Quiet confidence growing like a slow-burning fire beneath the skin, a heat that does not shout but radiates, a presence felt without announcement. Emotional storms lose their sway over him, because he has discovered that discipline is not a product of feeling, motivation, or inspiration, but of repeated obedience to action, and the body remembers what the mind doubts. Where once he waited for energy, mood, or certainty, now he moves regardless of condition, because moving is a signal that he exists, that he commands, that he can trust himself to begin and follow through. The small victories, sending the message, starting the document, lifting the sword, rising with the alarm, compound into an identity that cannot be undone by distraction, that cannot be shaken by opinion, that does not bend under the weight of delay. And the man who acts becomes reliable to himself first, and from that reliability radiates competence and quiet authority. Discipline is no longer external, a list of habits or rituals, but internal, woven into the nervous system, encoded into the reflexes, a natural response rather than a forced effort. And in this shift, he feels calm because he knows he will move, he knows he will act, he knows that hesitation no longer defines him. The contrast is stark and visceral. Before, life was a waiting room of moods, motivation, and excuses, each day spent negotiating with oneself, each day passing without proof of courage or commitment. After, life is a river of action, and he flows with it, unbroken and unafraid, moving decisively because his body, mind, and identity are aligned. And the hesitation that once paralyzed him is now an echo of a past self he barely recognizes. This transformation does not make him flawless. It makes him alive. It gives him a spine of action, a structure of reliability, a capacity to meet difficulty without retreat, and a presence that commands respect silently. Musashi understood that a warrior's power lies not only in his skill with the sword, but in the mind that acts without hesitation, and this is the same for the modern man. Skill alone is nothing without the inner architecture that supports action, and identity cannot be borrowed from motivation. It must be earned through repeated obedience. The man who acts learns to trust discomfort, to move despite uncertainty, to welcome the tension that signals growth rather than fearing it. And in this, he becomes dangerous to stagnation, immune to the paralysis that traps lesser men, and capable of carving his own path in a world designed to distract and dilute. Each motion, each initiation, each refusal to delay cements his authority over himself, and authority over the self is the foundation of every other form of mastery, because nothing external can replace the power of a man who moves, decides, and exists fully in alignment with the demands of reality, and as he carries this forward, he lives proof of the principle Musashi embodied. Discipline is built in the moment of execution, not in thought, and action is the only language through which a man announces that he exists, that he commands, and that he refuses to be passive. But discipline without direction becomes emptiness, Musashi warned. And so the next step, the final step, is not only to act, but to act with intent, with purpose, with alignment toward the life he has chosen to inhabit. Discipline alone is hollow, a skeleton without flesh, and the man who moves relentlessly but without purpose is not powerful. He is exhausted, trapped in motion that has no direction, a machine of habit stripped of meaning. And Musashi knew this intimately, teaching that mastery is not found in the perfection of technique, but in the alignment of action with the way, the principle that governs thought, movement, and intent simultaneously. Discipline must serve something greater than the self. It must reflect values and spirit. Otherwise it decays into mere motion, and motion without meaning breeds fatigue, frustration, and eventual collapse. Stillness combined with action is the alchemy of mastery, the moment where preparation and execution meet with awareness. And from this union, clarity, precision, and presence emerge, and a man begins to inhabit his life fully rather than merely perform tasks. Musashi's philosophy was never about optimizing every strike, every routine, every decision for efficiency alone. The way is lived, not optimized. An obsession with optimization without understanding purpose is a trap modern men fall into constantly, believing that more planning, more structure, more output will make them whole, when in truth it only increases the weight of unexamined labor, producing stress instead of strength, busy work instead of power. The modern world teaches hustle as virtue, yet endless motion without spirit leads to quiet implosion. The same way a body overtrained without rest breaks down, and the man who acts without direction eventually finds his energy depleted, his confidence hollow, and his identity eroded, because movement without meaning cannot carry the weight of the self, and nothing external can compensate for this emptiness. Discipline is a tool, a blade to be wielded with intention, and when it is aligned with purpose, it generates endurance, resilience, and an internal authority that is unshakable. When it is misaligned, it produces only exhaustion, distraction, and the illusion of progress. The man who understands this begins to filter his actions not through what is urgent, convenient, or flashy, but through what advances his way, his mission, his values, and in doing so, he transforms discipline from obligation into expression, from constraint into liberation, and from repetition into mastery. This is a critical lesson Musashi offers to the modern man who has learned to act but not yet to live. Mastery is not in doing more. It is in doing rightly, in moving with awareness, in letting purpose dictate motion, and in using discipline to serve something enduring beyond temporary satisfaction. Every task, every choice, every step becomes infused with meaning, and suddenly the effort is lighter, the energy more abundant, because it is no longer expended against resistance but directed toward a vision, toward a way that shapes the man as surely as action shapes the body. Hustle without meaning collapses, movement without spirit fails, action without alignment is powerless. But when discipline serves intention, when stillness meets motion, when the way is lived rather than optimized, the man becomes unstoppable because he moves with purpose, strength, and awareness. And one final act remains, proof that this isn't just another video, but a step into the life he has chosen to inhabit. The moment of transformation is incomplete until it is made visible, until it is committed beyond thought and into reality. And this begins with a declaration, a public act that carries weight far beyond mere words, because it declares to confront hesitation directly, to stake a claim against delay, and to force the mind and body to obey. Choose one domain of your life where hesitation has held dominion, whether it is your work, your health, your learning, or your relationships, and write a declaration of action, clear, uncompromising, and bound to the principle that you will move within 3 minutes of intention, no exceptions, no negotiation, no retreat. Do not overthink the wording. Do not wait for inspiration. Do not polish it for comfort. The value is not in perfection, but in initiation, because action precedes confidence, and commitment is proven by execution, not contemplation. Once a declaration exists, act immediately, within 3 minutes, on the very first step it demands, whether that is opening a document, picking up the phone, standing and moving, or beginning the task you have deferred, because the true weight of a promise lies in immediate fulfillment, and the act itself teaches what words alone cannot, that you are a man who moves, who decides, who refuses to yield to hesitation. The path is revealed by walking, and no philosophy, no strategy, no inspiration can replace the momentum generated by the first step, the first motion, the first proof of obedience to your own will. Musashi did not wait to feel ready, and he did not deliberate endlessly while enemies and fate demanded action. He acted first, and through action he became unstoppable. And in this, he offers a template for modern men. Readiness is born in motion. Courage is born in doing, and identity is forged in a commitment to begin before the mind protests. Your declaration is your first act of war, not against others, but against your own hesitation, your own compromise, and the complacency that has filled so many hours, days, and years with almost and nothings. When you write it, you externalize your commitment. When you act upon it immediately, you internalize your authority over yourself, and this authority is unshakable because it is proven, not imagined. There will be no grand flourish, no applause, no validation from the world. This is private power made public only through action, a ritual of self-command that begins with a pen, a movement, and a refusal to delay. And in that simplicity lies the depth of mastery, the quiet fire that cannot be extinguished by distraction or doubt. Calm, controlled, and unapologetic, you step into the moment as a man who begins, the man who decides, the man who moves without hesitation, and every subsequent motion becomes easier, sharper, more decisive. Because the first act is shatter the false authority of fear, proving that the self can be trusted to act, and in this lies freedom, power, and identity unshakable by circumstance. The 3-minute rule is no longer theory, the way is no longer abstraction, and your life is no longer hostage to indecision, because a man who declares and moves has stepped fully into his own authority, and in that moment, the path forward is no longer hidden. It is revealed in every step, every action, every commitment on it immediately, and the quiet, unstoppable momentum of a life built on decisive execution begins. Irreversible and true,